What I wanted to do was read and kind of react sorta to this interview from Gamesbeat with Ion Hazzikostas that was published yesterday. Wowhead already has an article on it. I'm sure people already have videos on it, but here's my take on what is going on here. I didn't read it. I read a couple of bullet points from the Wowhead article, but very little else. And I got a couple of things. I got a couple little snippets from folks from the Discord channel. So I invite you all to sit and read with me. I'll have, if I put this on VOD on YouTube, I will have a link to this article in the description below, and we shall begin. World of Warcraft prepares for the future as 9.2 launches. All right. Yay. World of Warcraft's new big patch 9.2, Shadows of Eternity. Wow. Okay, buddy. It launched today. This is the last chapter of the Shadowlands expansion, and it represents something of a crossroads or maybe a bridge for Blizzard. The MMO and its team have been through some hectic times. Accusations of workplace problems and investigations into those issues surfaced last year. In January, Microsoft shocked the world by announcing its plan to purchase World of Warcraft's parent company, Activision Blizzard. Even outside all of that madness, World of Warcraft has been dealing with an increasingly discontent fan base. Many players disliked Shadowlands' story and its over-reliance on convoluted progression systems. Blizzard has been taking steps to win fans back, including making plans to finally allow players from the two games' opposing factions, Alliance and Horde, to play together. I had a chance to talk with World of Warcraft game director Ion Hazzikostas and senior-level designer Sara Wons. I think we've seen her. We discussed what's new in today's update, as well as what's coming in the MMO's future. So Gamesbeat asks, aside from the typical adding a lot of new content, what are some of the biggest design goals with 9.2? I understand that some of what I'm going to read and reread is going to be a lot of fluff. You know, just the stuff that's, okay, I get it, they're doing lip service, they're hyping things up. We'll deal with that for now, and hopefully we'll find some good stuff in here. Ian says, first off, we're adding a ton of new content, but in a lot of ways it's carrying forward the philosophies that we pivoted to, in many cases, in 9.1.5 in response to player feedback over the course of Shadowlands. Building a whole new ecosystem, a whole new piece of content from the ground up with those in mind. As players are experiencing the thrilling conclusion to Shadowlands, as we're going to this mysterious, amazing, high-concept land of Zereth Mortis and taking the fight to the jailer, going through the raid and dungeons. Throughout the process, we've asked ourselves on the system side, what are the things traditionally that are going to be pain points 2 or 3 months down the line? Maybe I should do that bounce, the Ian bounce. We're bringing back class sets. How will players feel 2 months into the patch when they want to switch characters, or their friends are coming back and they feel like they're behind with no way to catch up on getting their set pieces? Okay, let's add a system. That sort of thing we previously patched in down the line from the start. That's dubious, because it doesn't activate until 2 months into the thing, but at least we're not waiting for a patch, right? We have this creation catalyst that players will be able to unlock using currency a couple of months creation catalyst that players will be able to unlock using currency? I thought it was just like 8 weeks and then and we just get it. We just get a quest or something like that. Interesting. We have this thing in to target and specifically accelerate their acquisition of set pieces, build their own sets in a deterministic, non-RNG way. You just need the gear. We made most of our unlocks account-wide, whether it's flying in the zone or access to content. In general, just trying to get ahead of what we've been hearing from players in recent years and taking those lessons to heart and building them into the content from the ground up. Now, this part is an important lesson to learn, and we have seen reflections of these lessons from the very start of Shadowlands, but it wasn't enough. We had Threads of Fate, cool. We also had conduits, ugh. So it was, we're seeing like Blizzard being, or the WoW team being very conservative about what they're opening up, because when they do, there's no really going back from that. now that we've had these things, it's hard to take those things. I'm not talking about borrowed power. I'm talking about being able to access these sorts of things account wide, being able to access these skips and so on and so forth. That's much more tougher to take away from folks. It's kind of similar to flying. How flying is sort of taken away from us each time an expansion comes along and we have those same old conversations. So things like these are much worse, and that's why I would imagine it's for them to do this, they're doing it very, very slowly if they can get away with it. And they're not really getting away with it. Gamesbeat continues. These big patches usually introduce a new zone. This time we get Zereth Mortis. How does this one differentiate itself from some of the other Shadowlands zones or other patch zones that we've seen before? Again, fluff. Sara Wons says, Zereth Mortis is an opportunity for us to dig even deeper into the crazy universe that we've already seen with Shadowlands, but then really take it to the next level. We were intrigued by the idea of keeping this place mysterious while also giving some breadcrumbs and things for players to figure out. We dove into who are the progenitors, how would they have functioned, how would they have built anything here. We ended up focusing on the building blocks of the universe and sacred geometry. You'll see that woven into the landscape here, and the denizens and in the creatures. That's one thing that we focused on, that recurring theme of this sacred geometry, as well as mystery and things to explore. So ultimately, the World of Warcraft is math. Gamesbeat asks, there's this progression system here with the Cypher of the first ones, but this one seems like it's not corresponding to player power as much as we've seen with similar systems in the past. Does that represent another core change in design philosophy? Ooh, I want to know this one. Ian says, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a core change. It's more trying to support parallel paths of progression and different playstyles, recognizing that there are a bunch of folks who love outdoor world gameplay. Hey guys, that's what they do, their entire endgame. We hadn't necessarily served them as well as dungeon players or competitive PvP players or raiders in the past. We wanted to take steps towards changing that. We set up a system that has a lot of depth, a lot of deep understanding of the zone, thoroughly integrated into the zone's mechanics as something for those explorers to really delve into. But we understand, and we certainly heard loud and clear from the community, that if we put power that will increase your damage in a dungeon or damage in a raid behind the system, it now becomes mandatory, whether that's a gameplay you enjoy or not. And so, having this as something that is, for hardcore power gamers, optional, but still deep in something that they can take at their own pace, it's something we're trying to do to offer a range of options without pressuring people to play the game in a way that they'd rather not. Pause. So the thought in mind, I keep going back to the idea of tier sets and how this translates into this statement here. And I still feel strongly, very strongly, that that's kind of a gameplay sort of thing that all players ought to have access to. Not the same, because I'm not asking for like 278 or whatever the heck item level tier pieces or regular gear to drop from world content. I think there is an appropriate argument or discussion to have where we would say, hey, you know what? People who do world content, they don't really need to have that kind of item level. That's fine. And maybe there is some weird convoluted medium where it's like, okay, the gear that you have outdoor content, it works here, but then there's special gear that works better in raids, but it works the same way in outdoor content. Something like that is possible, but I think that would be more than anything just confusing. And so personally, just speaking for me, I'm okay with not having, the same item level as raiders, PvPers, dungeon folk, but there are cool world buffs that these people in outdoor content that they have access to that still make them feel really strong and powerful and stuff. So I'm totally cool with that. But it's cool to see, they're taking a step in the right direction. For some folks, though, it's just not going fast enough. Anyway, Gamesbeat asks, as vocal as the community can be about some things, the raids have already been popular and people are looking forward to the new one, the Sepulchre of the First Ones. What are going to be some of the highlights, maybe some of the most exciting bosses that you think players will enjoy from this raid? So, that's a very controversial question. No. Ian says, this raid is a doozy. We had a ton of fun with its conception and making the whole thing from top to bottom. Something that's really fun that we haven't had a chance to do in quite a while is the final 3 bosses of the raid have never been seen in the public test realm. They've been thoroughly tested internally, but in this zone full of secrets and mysteries, we wanted to try to preserve some of that sense of mystery that's been so lacking in this age of data mining and broad knowledge. When players go into the last section of the raid on the 3rd week of the patch, they're not going to know what awaits them. They'll figure it out. People will write their guides. There will be YouTube videos. That's inevitable. But on those first couple of days, it's going to be a truly novel experience. That's not something that WoW has seen in a long time. Beyond that, there are amazing encounters. I think Anduin could be an end boss in most other raid zones, but in this one, he's just a major boss 2/3 of the way through. The team has gone above and beyond with environmental integration on a lot of these encounters. The Jailer fight in particular makes impressive use of very unique gameplay space and elements in the room, but anything more than I could say would be a spoiler. I wonder if Sepulchre works out and the last 3 bosses don't turn out to be like either Raffle Stomp, like whoops, they didn't test it too well, or mathematically impossible, again, they didn't test it too well. If this works, I wonder if the team might be like, you know what? I think we got it, guys. I think we can do this. And then they will just stop doing it. I wonder if this is a successful experiment, will they just stop doing raid testing? Yeah, I wouldn't mind that one bit. In fact, I would say go even further and, don't put anything in the dungeon journal. Go ahead and encrypt boss information, boss and ability information, so that, data miners can't figure out heads or tails like, is this going to be a raid mechanic? Maybe, but we have no idea how it translates and all that stuff. So that could be cool. I think that would be a very neat thing. Sorry, chats. I will talk about this as soon as I'm done with this thing. What are some of the other highlights that players can look forward to in 9.2? Sara Wons says, one of the really cool things that we have this time around is the Cypher of the First Ones, and that also ties into the mystery and the breadcrumbs for players to uncover. We like the idea that this place is so foreign that you can't even speak the language. When you arrive, you see these glyphs in your chat coming from the Automa here. Who are left behind to keep the place running. You will work with one of the Enlightened, Firam, and he'll help you figure out how to decipher this mysterious language. Through the Cypher the First Ones, you also unlock dailies and quests and rewards and all kinds of fun things. You also get this amazing little construct named Pokepoke, who I would die for. There's just a lot of fun, awesome things built into the system that I'm excited for players to experience. Fun. All right, now moving on to communication and expectations. You brought up some things that being tied more to accounts than characters. What's the current Blizzard philosophy on alts? Is it more important for progression to be tied to accounts or characters? Ian says that that's something we've definitely been talking about a lot. The core character-based progression is power progression. It's getting gear, just getting stronger, that central RPG experience that's part of what we think players are often looking for when they make a new character. They've reached a plateau. They're done with the goals on one character. They want to experience the journey again with another. If you're not feeling rewarded by running dungeons and getting item upgrades because you already have it all, that feels like it takes a big piece of that repeat experience. On the other hand, thankfully he followed up on that. On the other hand, access to content, let me emphasize that, access to content and convenience and travel and things like that are things that you experience as a player. If you have to do some content to unlock quests in this area or unlock access to this dungeon or unlock the ability to fly, re-earning those things doesn't feel like a reward when we ask you to do it the second or third time. It just feels like a penalty we inflict, and that's not what rewards should feel like. In a middle ground are pieces of content that really are just best the first time through. We want them to be optional if you want to go back and do them again, but they lose a lot of impact because they weren't designed for maximum replayability. Oh, I got something to say on that. Core narrative content is a big example of this. You have big epic quest lines that go all the way through Zereth Mortis and lead to the conclusion of many of the events in Shadowlands. The fate of the jailer, the fate of the Shadowlands as a whole. Awesome quests. Once you've done them, you, the player, have done them. We don't want to make every character, every alt go through these experiences unless they want to replay them. That's something where we make sure the major unlocks are account-wide. Now, I think the conversation to have here, because there's a certain conversation to have here, because what Ian is saying in this, as I'm understanding it, he's drawing a line between what is okay to be account-wide and what is not. Player power, not account-wide. Player, but things like questing and things like that, those ought to be account-wide. We've seen some reflections of that, but again, like I said earlier, it's been very like, they've been taking kind of baby steps. It's been a little bit inconsistent. Korthia progression was inconsistent. They needed to patch that in 9.15. Meanwhile, Threads of Fate, that was built in. Threads of Fate itself, that needed some tweaking to make things a little bit more comfortable, to be powered up a little bit more. They did that over the course of patches, so that's kind of a work in progress, and we're seeing the movement in this direction. But again, the discussion and conversation that I think that players ought to be having, or the player discourse ought to be, what should be allowed to be, what should be account wide, what is okay to for players to repeat again. In this case, Ian is trying to draw that line of player power, gearing up. Those things are going to be, those things are for each individual character. And not everyone agrees with that. Some folks are straight up like, we want to have, we want gear to be account wide. We want item level to be account wide. I've seen plenty of comments in videos and forums and whatnot that are asking for something like that. Personally, I think that's pretty damn ludicrous, but I think we ought to hear more of these voices. And then there are things that kind of that are a little bit vague. They fall into a more gray area. For example, reputation. Some folks want account-wide reputation. The question, though, is what is behind this reputation? Is it power? If it is power, then I would definitely agree with, okay, maybe there should be something like, a tabard, an account-wide boost, something like renown, yada, yada, yada. But if there's nothing but just cosmetic stuff to make your character feel cool, because it's like, oh, okay, I played an orc on this character. This character's an orc. He would look really cool on this. But this other character's a damn dirty goblin person. They would look terrible in that. I could care less. Maybe that would be like a little bit different. But at the same time, reputation rewards at the cosmetic level, those are also account wide. So it's very unclear, and players are not in agreement at all with with what is okay to be account wide and what is not, what can be skipped, what shouldn't, and that sort of thing. So I think we should keep having this conversation. And it seems like they're kind of, it seems like they're open to it, but Ian has definitely drawn that line. So I don't know. Gamesbeat continues. For a long time, it seems like there was a battle between this sort of min-max mentality. You wanted players to understand that they don't have to max out their characters, but it always felt like, no, people want to max, and if they don't, they feel like they're missing out. Is that the conclusion you also came to? Ian says that's one of the big lessons. What about Sara? Come on, maybe she got something to say. That's one of the big lessons learned over the course of Shadowlands. It's a trend that's present across gaming in general. The metagaming, figuring out what the metagame is. A new game comes out and people want to know about the tier list of classes or characters. Heaven forbid you pick the wrong one. I kind of like that snark coming from him. In Shadowlands, we set out initially having some options, some rewards that we imagined would be just for hardcore min-maxers and completionists. I think he's going to talk about conduits. If you want to chase adding a socket to your gear for a fraction of a percent of damage, or upgrading this conduit for a fraction of a percent of damage, we wanted to give that to people who wanted to go deep on their characters rather than going broad and playing lots of alts, something to work for, some reason to do it. Yeah, that worked out. We often hear feedback that people are upset when they run out of goals and lack the motivation to do anything. But what we found, to our initial dismay and horror to some extent, is that a much broader range of players than we expected saw this 0.4% increase, power increase that was behind something they didn't necessarily enjoy doing as absolutely mandatory. And that's not the outcome we wanted. The game needs to be fun. You need to log in and look forward to the adventures you're going to have, the things that you'll do with your friends, the stuff that you're going to explore, the goals you're going to chase, and not feel like you have a set of chores you have to accomplish before you can play the game the way you want to. As much as possible, we're pivoting away from that and trying to offer true options without power dictating gameplay. So my hope is that they just take conduits and either just take them away or just give them to us. Remember glyphs? I keep going back to that. Glyphs were great. They were managed by professions. When people got access to making those glyphs, then people got them. They paid gold for it, but then they just got them. And then at some point, they were just put onto a library, and then you just had them. Imagine friends, if they had if they brought back that sort of glyph system. Major glyphs, whatever, major glyphs, minor glyphs. And that was like a kind of account-wide thing. You just needed to get those things once, and then it was shared across your entire account. So sure you would need to buy glyphs for like each and every one of your classes. But at least if for those people who have multiple classes, at the very least you'd be able to just buy, at least they would be able to share those glyphs or something like that. It was such an easy thing. But I like hearing this, that they're acknowledging that, hey, you know what, that 0.4 thing, cool. Now, I do think that, social media and whatnot, they've done a lot of, I guess, damage to players, to players' mindset, and getting people on this bandwagon that, we literally are useless without max level conduits and so on and so forth. We're, at a certain level, for the most part, the way I see it, as long as you just have that conduit, like, you're okay. There are some definite outliers where the percentage difference or the performance difference is greater for some classes over others. I totally get that, but just kind of as a general thing, conduits, they're like, they're not that. They don't seem like that big of a deal. Moving on though. Gamesbeat says, you talked about the data mining aspect. This is a long interview. Is it frustrating seeing players reacting sometimes to dialogue mined out of a patch before it even launches? Oh man, there's not a lot of context there, but the wheels start going. How is it going to do this one? He says, it's double-edged. On the one hand, it honestly reflects enthusiasm and curiosity, and we're always grateful for that. We're grateful that so many players out there want to know what happens next. So even-handed. That's a natural outgrowth of that. At the same time, it can be frustrating at times when it spoils pieces of the story and leads to conclusions because something is taken wildly out of context. At times, you might be looking forward to the next episode of your favorite show, but when you get the script leak, but it's not the script, just lines all out of order, and people are trying to piece together how it all fits together and what it means. Sometimes we can't rebut assumptions that are being made without spoiling the game ourselves. We tried to pursue measures in the past couple of years to make it a bit easier to keep things like text of dialogue or quests from being data mined until they're seen in context. Often they'll be seen in context in PTR, but at least it's someone playing through the content for testing purposes as intended, rather than just seeing a line out of context and inferring. But in the end, it's driven by curiosity. We understand that and appreciate it. But he's not talking. But I know they mostly talked about story. And because the question asked for it, but I'm also thinking about the design of things. Like we've taught and we've shared some of that discourse over the past couple of months, like flying, how that's going to work. Cypher research, how that's going to work. We've drawn conclusions, we've made guesstimates, and from that, people reacted, sometimes strongly. OMG, based on this PTR information that may change, in the very next build, F this, I'm going to quit. I can't handle this anymore. Some people just can't emotionally handle ongoing development stuff. I think there was a tweet over the weekend by a former person on the WoW community team. They were asking a question that was similar to something like this, and I said something along the lines of, or they were asking a question on how do you feel if they just stopped doing public testing, and I said, as a commentator or whatever, I'd be fine with it. Sure, I would be able to come out with. I wouldn't be really. I'd have less to talk about during a test period because we wouldn't be able to see anything, obviously. But I would just be making other content instead. But while I would be okay, I think that this would be a big plus for people who just can't mentally handle this sort of thing because of strong reactions. Now, public testing, it has proven to be like a good thing for in many ways. Again, I just talked about Cypher research. I talked about flight. Earlier, there were conduits. For those of you who may not remember, conduits were originally going to be an item that we were going to continuously farm in perpetuity from dungeons or other content in order to like replace them. So back then, if we wanted to swap out conduits, we needed to just go into a dungeon and find new ones. That's how it started as. The backlash on that was very one-sided. It was immense. And then that's when Blizzard was like, okay, we'll do this thing, but we need to have something here, or they felt like they needed to have something here. So let's add in conduit energy. And so we had that sort of thing. I'm probably going to talk about, I thought about talking about conduits in another video, as in, hey, here's one of the worst things that Blizzard ever thought of, and tell that quick story. But anyway, like I said, it's a double-edged. Some people can't handle it, but when it comes to like feedback loops and people giving their input, I think that's, it works out. The worst thing I think about having public testing is that it erodes trust for the WoW team. Because now we'll credit ourselves for the things that changed in a good way, and not Blizzard. But we'll also blame Blizzard for having things that we don't like, and not ourselves for maybe not having good enough feedback or good enough suggestions or whatever. And that's hardly a fair thing from either direction. There's a lot to talk about on that. Let's move on, though. Cross-faction is happening. Gamesbeat says, the last time I talked with you, Ian, I asked if cross-faction raiding would be on the horizon. You surprised me a little when you opened the door for that, and now here we are. It's coming. How difficult was this feature to finally implement for the game? Ian says, difficult enough that it can't be done for 9.2. It'll come in a patch shortly after. Shortly. When we last spoke, I knew it was something we were working on, and thus opening the door to this, not quite ready to announce it, but I had a feeling that we might be more open to it than before. A lot of this came out of discussions we had as a team about listening more closely to player feedback, being more willing to challenge some closely held beliefs that we saw as foundational pillars of World of Warcraft. One of those was cross-faction gameplay. Back then, early fall, we decided we wanted to do this thing. Certainly, there was no way to do it for 9.15, but we set out figuring out what we'd have to do to change our code, in our UI, and pieces of content to allow Alliance and Horde to opt in, to choose to make that same decision that Jaina, Thrall, and others have made to reach across the divide and play with each other against common foes if they want to, or stay apart if they want to. So it sounds like this reflects what they said earlier, that Ian doesn't, or that they don't really want to have they don't want to put in some story or role play context thing into why factions will be able to play together in raids and whatnot. It's just going to assume that it's already been happening. Sort of, I guess. Gamesbeat continues asking, I know that you've been maybe a little worried that people would react negatively to this, maybe not want these factions working together. What has that reaction from players been like? Overall, it's been pleasing and a relief. We hope that this was how it would be taken. We knew that many people wanted this and had been asking it for years. We knew they'd be excited. Part of the concern was, again, as voiced in the blog, that there's some unease about tearing down this barrier that has been such a defining part of the franchise for so long. Positioning as something that's opt-in, or if you want to be a proud member of the Horde and not associate with elves or whoever else, we're not going to change that. We're not going to force this experience on you. Many players on RP servers take this seriously. Even when examining faction, one of the burdens on us, there's people with Horde and Alliance tattoos all over the place. What are we doing to these closely held and cherished ideas for people? We're very happy to see how it's all been received, and even more excited to see it in people's hands and start getting feedback on it. One of the things that I think I kind of sort of remember that Ian said in that blog is that when they first talked about the faction divide and all that, they said that Horde and Alliance separation is core to World of Warcraft, and that he wanted to that in hindsight that was a mistake, and what he should have said was Horde and Alliance identity is what is essential to the World of Warcraft, and I believe in that. I didn't really think about this. He mentioned people that straight up have like Horde tattoos and Alliance tattoos. There are people who take this really, really, really seriously. They are personally offended or hurt by, by the Alliance get a point, the Horde get a point, the Horde lose another faction leader. The Alliance people, they fall in line under the king again. So some people feel very strongly about these sorts of things, and it's not something that I fully understand, and maybe I haven't been respecting. But I do also feel strongly that for the preservation of, big part of enjoying the game is enjoying the game, and when it feels like it's being compromised by this divide, which I'd never believed in myself, things need to change. So we're seeing a little bit of that. Anyway, Gamesbeat writes, do you think this will be the limit? Are cross-faction guilds a possibility, or do we need to wait and see how people react to this first wave? Ian says, there's certainly a possibility. We know better than to close the door definitively on almost anything, but we want to be guided by feedback. We'll stay conservative in this space, as we always are, because it really is a one-way process. If we loosen restrictions and allow the formation of social bonds, there's no way we can ever roll that back. We can't tell a group that's been playing together for a number of months, sorry, we decided this was a mistake, you can't do that anymore. We'll proceed cautiously, and as always, we'll be informed and guided by our players. I have a feeling, though, that it would be irresponsible design or irresponsible management for Ian to say, you know what, we're probably going to do it, so just kind of go ahead and maybe we'll just flip the switch later on. But maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't, and that's not the kind of thing you want to do. Gamesbeat continues. There are some raids that have so much faction exclusive content that they won't be supported for this feature right away. Is that something you think will be eventually added in, or is it not the highest priority right now? Frankly, both, I would say, says Ian. Eventually, we want to commit adding all of those and having full support for all of them. At the release of the feature, the overwhelming majority of dungeons and raids, including the legacy content of 17 years, will support cross-faction gameplay. It's just that short list, like the Battle of the Tsar lore, raids that just from the ground up were meant to have an Alliance and Horde separate experience. We just need to figure out how to handle that and make it work. We'll get it done, but it's not worth holding up the entire feature for that handful of dungeons. And now the future. Gamesbeat says, 9.2 is the finale for Shadowlands. Were there ever plans for a 9. This is the one that people sent me a lot. Were there ever plans for a 9.3? Is it a similar situation to Warlords where later we find out about some stuff that never made it to patch content, or is this more or less the plan? Ian says this was completely the plan. I've seen all the speculation from content creators and others that originally Anduin was going to be the final boss of 9.2, and then there was going to be a separate 9.3, but no. It was always a story in 3 parts. The plan was always the 4 zones of the Shadowlands, delving into the Maw, the power of domination there, and then going to this land of the progenitors, Zereth Mortis. We were planning out the city of Orboz before Shadowlands was even released. That's a weird thing to say. Maybe he was meant Zereth Mortis or whatever. Anyway, there's this major gateway, mysterious gateway in the Arbiter's chamber that we always knew would eventually lead to Zereth Mortis. The pace, the structure of stories is something where there isn't necessarily a specific formula. At times in the past, we had a mid-tier patch that felt like a digression where it's like, all right, now we'll go deal with Lei Shen and the Mogu in the middle of Pandaria, and then go back to proceeding with the Garrosh storyline or whatever else. Here in the Shadowlands, in the realm of the afterlife, the Jailer was front and center, and pursuit of the Jailer felt like the only thing that we would really focus on. The story has played out as we intended, and I can't wait for players to witness the conclusion in just a few weeks. So I have no choice but to believe the words that are spoken until something leaks, right? So I will believe this. And from that, I will judge. And I will say that this was a bad idea, that this was not a good thing. This was a bad call to make from the WoW team or Ion or, the decision makers or whatever. And it's because it just feels like there's holes. There are things that are definitely missing. It feels like there's a season's worth of content that could have been there. I feel like they call it a 3-part story, but I still feel like there could have been like a season's worth of content that could have fleshed out these 3 parts. So, here we are, 9.1, the 4 zones of the Shadowlands. Cool. Actually, I'd say it was, the start was, this was 9.1 or 9.0. Delving into the Maw, Korthia, Sanctum of Domination, that sort of thing. But then, if the Jailer was still going to be front and center, I think there still could have been something between here and here. There could have or would have been something that could have stayed central to the story, but would have been enough to create its own 9.2. I mean, notice that he didn't straight up say this is what kind of makes it feel like, okay, this is very sidesteppy. Notice that I guess it's like he doesn't explicitly say that there was never I just don't fully buy into it. I don't quite buy into it. Maybe he's saying no to this specific claim that, hey, Anduin's going to be the final boss in 9.2, blah, blah, blah. But I still feel like there's going to be something right here. Something here was going, there was going to be things to do. And it still could have been 100% about the Jailer and Shadowlands and trying to save everything and blah, 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 blah. But I fully believe that there is something that could have and should have been there. The biggest red flag to me, some people's red flags were, hey, you look at Orboz and you see like the whole donut and the way that things are spaced out. There is space for one more thing. And that could have been another place to go to. Maybe. That I don't buy into as much as I buy into the idea that, buy into the question of, why is it that Tazavesh, the mega dungeon, only gets 1 season of Mythic Plus? That doesn't seem right at all. The way I see it, if they intended for, if this was the intention, Tazavesh should have been Mythic Plus from the start. It should have been in from the start. You know, they have, you know, you need 2,500 or whatever to get KSM and all that. Having Tazavesh only be a 1-season dungeon for Mythic Plus, to me, that's like the big one. Maybe the lawyer. No, fuck the lawyer speak thing. I think trying to pin the lawyer thing on him is like the cringiest thing. Like, you hear it, people cringe, or otherwise, yeah, it's don't go in that direction. I strongly encourage people, don't go in that direction, because that just tells that just kind of kills discussion. Clearly though, there is some misdirection that's going on here. They're trying to hide shit, but we may never know. Still though, this leaves me to just judge that on its face, it was still a really bad call. They just decided this poorly. Sorry, guys. Gamesbeat continues saying, I know how much you probably love talking about something beyond the big patch that you're promoting here, but without going into specifics, should players expect a longer than normal wait for the next content drop after this one? Normally, we'd probably hear about the next expansion around the time of the last major patch, but there's no BlizzCon. How long a wait are we in for, and how will players learn about what's coming next? Ian writes, right now, we're definitely focused on getting Eternity's End out into folks' hands, right? We want everyone to see and experience the end of Shadowlands, and then we'll have more exciting news following that. Stay tuned for news about when and where to learn more, but nothing specific to add now. Please. Gamesbeat writes, you probably heard, but there's an exciting big acquisition. I'm sure players are all wondering, is that going to mean any changes to World of Warcraft at all? Ian says World of Warcraft is going to continue as everyone knows and loves it. Beyond that, for legal reasons, I can't comment. Okay. On the last earnings call, they did mention some kind of new World of Warcraft mobile game. Does that have any connection to World of Warcraft? Again, I'm here to speak for the World of Warcraft team, not my place to share other product news. I want to hear more shit, though. Gamesbeat writes, Shadowlands, Legion, and Battle for Azeroth. We had 3 expansions with similar systems, like borrowed power. What do you think were some of the best things that worked with the philosophy we saw in this wave of expansions? And what are some things where you think it's maybe time to move on from? I kind of like the wording of it. It's like, come on, dude, here's your out. Tell us we're moving away from this stuff. Ian writes, we'll be talking about this a lot more in the future as we talk about moving on to the next expansion, and big picture lessons are learned there. Quick reflections, the term borrowed power is one that's certainly been thrown around the community a lot, often in a disparaging sense. Oh, you're getting this power, but it's not really yours, and you have to give it back. On some level, that's a double-edged sword. From the artifact system onward, the fact that things were temporarily the fact that things were temporary enabled the team to pull out all the stops with them and make them more immediately impactful, deeper, transformative of your gameplay than they ever would have if they needed to last forever, if they were all going to be these additive things for your character. Imagine having all your talents, plus your full artifact weapon, plus Azerite powers, plus Covenants. At some point, it would just be complete nonsense. We wouldn't have gone a fraction of that way. And I don't think he mentions it here, but imagine having to acquire all those things if you're like a new player and having to go through that entire flow. At the same time, we recognize that part of an RPG, part of progression, is the feeling of growth, of moving forward and gaining power, and the knowledge that you're going to leave most or all of what you're earning behind. It does diminish the sense of accomplishment and growth. These expansions often start with a feeling of loss, which is not ideal. Rather than getting something new and exciting, you're working on to replace the old exciting thing that you lost. That's all stuff we're heatedly discussing. We have tons of thoughts about it across the team. We're excited to address and learn from that going forward. Part of what we've done in Shadowlands was a direct reflection of lessons learned from Legion and Battle for Azeroth. This gets back to some of our discussion earlier about power gaming and the motivations of min-maxing. Both of those artifact power systems in past expansions were designed as diminishing return systems, where there was no hard cap on progression. and players could figure out for themselves when it stopped being worth their time to keep pushing further. We did that in the name of freedom, but what we actually found out was that for many players, any power was required, and that caused a lot of burnout. We approached Shadowlands systems in a much more structured way that didn't have an open-ended grind to them, but still allowed for meaningful additional choice and gameplay depth. Looking back and continuing to look at Covenant abilities and the way they transform gameplay, those have been tremendously successful. We're already hearing players say, hey, I hope I can keep invoking spirits forever because I can't imagine playing a druid without this ability. That's a sign of success. Gamesbeat... So things to say on this, not much, because I think he covered himself about what they intend to do. It's just a matter, it's just the, okay, cool. These are nice, rosy words, buddy. But then what about what you're actually going to do about it? Yeah, you're having heated discussions about it, but what about the decisions? That's what's most important, because that is what's going to be reflective on what we actually end up playing. So, Gamesbeat says, I imagine we'll see some of those abilities being reworked into the standard class toolkit that we've seen with the legendary weapon abilities and some of those things before, and he says more on that in the future. And it can feel a little frustrating. Once upon a time we had glyphs, and then some of those glyphs ended up turning into legendaries or artifact powers or talents, or legendaries again. And then after this expansion, they will somehow deactivate. They will go away. They'll only be usable in certain content, that sort of thing. And that can feel really frustrating. I hope they find, I hope that what we jump into next has a better medium than what we've had lately. Although I do admit that Shadowlands wasn't so bad. It's just a matter of what are we going to do with these abilities that we've been living with for the past 2 or so years. What's going to happen after that? Gamesbeat writes, last time I talked about morale at the studio, things seem to have progressed since then. The tone has been maybe softened a bit from some players. Some even see the acquisition as a sort of moving on point. I guess I just wonder, how is that morale now, and how has it changed from like 6 months ago? Sara Wons finally speaks up, saying, honestly, the team has really come together in such an awesome show of support of each other. That's been incredible to see. I feel like I'm closer to my teammates now than I have been even in the past. It's been inspiring to see everyone support each other. For the first time in my career, I feel like I have a voice, and I'm being encouraged to use it. It's encouraging. It's awesome to see. And that is it. And quick comment, I hope that things get better. Overall, this felt like one of the meatiest interviews that I've ever seen Ian and the WoW team do, because because there were some pretty direct questions asked. Faction divide, borrowed power, story, data mining. A lot of the pain points that I would try to bring up in these sorts of conversations and try a little bit, and try to wring some sort of answer out of this. As for immediate takeaways, not much, because, I'm sure we're gonna, just like in the near future, I'll probably hang Ian by his words, but you said this in an interview, and here's why we're gonna talk smack about this. But this was a fun one. I'm probably gonna put this out on VOD, and I'll separate the questions into like little timestamps or whatever. But that's it for right now. I hope you had a good time, and I thank you for putting up with my dictation here. But what do you think? Did you think this interview was pretty effective? Do you think it helped to quell some of the player discontent, or is it just fanning the fires for future bitching? Let me know in a comment below, and I'll see you guys for the next thing. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and all that stuff too. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.